Hello and welcome everyone to the Business Thinking Podcast. I'm Joe.
And I'm Alex, as always.
Oh, as always, he continues to be Alex. It's cold.
We're in our jumpers. It's the end of November. It's the cold edition of the Business Thinking Podcast.
Cold. We're so cool now.
Yeah.
So cool.
We'll make a joke about iceberg tables on here, maybe. I don't know.
God, insert fun joke.
About data. Yeah.
If only I knew any. Right, so
what are we going to be talking about today?
Today, cloud architecture.
Cloud platforms.
Cloud platforms even. Yeah, it's not cloud architecture, but cloud.
That gives away that I knew the topic beforehand.
Oh, no.
Anyway.
It's not like it's planned.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've got... cloud platforms. I think exactly we're discussing like the big players, what's best for you, what makes you make those sort of decisions, what actually sits best for you as a business, an enterprise, small startup business.
Mm-hmm.
What do you need? What don't you need? How do you manage it properly?
Yeah, and I think to clarify, we're talking about cloud infrastructure platforms here rather than cloud data platforms. So not the Snowflakes or the Databricks. We're going to be talking about the AWS, the Azure, the GCP.
Yes.
So a little bit of a change, but it's the reason I think we want to talk about this is because we're seeing more of a prevalence in Azure at the moment.
Yeah.
And the reason it's multi-layered, multifaceted why we're seeing that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time Azure becomes there's a side effect of the fact that a lot of companies are Azure based or Microsoft based.
It's a Microsoft effect.
Yeah, it's a natural, it's kind of a licensing symptom rather than necessarily a deliberate choice. That's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It depends on what you're using it for. I think Azure, because you're already on Microsoft, some of it makes sense. It integrates into a lot of your stuff. The Azure, the Active Directory, the Enter ID now, but the identity management is pretty industry standard. It's better than most of the other ones.
Yeah.
If you've ever tried to use AWS Cognito, anyone out there, you'll hint, don't. Not a particular criticism of AWS, but it's one of those things where it's one of the earliest services they developed and it's not got a lot of love. Although I think in recent years, actually, it has been improving.
It's one of those ones that just sort of got left behind.
Yeah, I think so. A lot of the other services are getting a bit more love because I believe the way AWS and a lot of these other cloud platforms do their development is they kind of have a small cross-functional team that may manage multiple services.
Yeah.
I think rather than having dedicated teams for each one because they have hundreds of services, so it doesn't really make sense.
I'm not surprised though. AWS is the sort of big original one, though, isn't it? So
AWS kind of led cloud infrastructure. Yeah, I mean, obviously the recent AWS outage, most things still run on AWS in the background.
I think that's kind of probably part of the reason why it sort of came up is because you had this with AWS going down and then even more recently Cloudflare, which is different thing, but still all these things relying on two major services.
Minor tangent, but what I found hilarious about the Cloudflare outage was that Down Detector was out because Down Detector, which tells you about outages, runs on Cloudflare. So you couldn't go on Down Detector to see if Cloudflare was down because Cloudflare was down.
Is there a Down Detector for Down Detector?
I don't know. Probably. There are alternatives to Down Detector. I just find it...
They run on AWS though.
I don't know. I just find it hilarious. Isn't that?
I did find that very funny.
Yeah.
The beautiful irony to that.
It's fantastic. Anyway, we digress. Azure, maybe anecdotally, seems to be growing more at the moment. It might just be because I'm seeing more enterprises using it, but there are other use cases for other cloud platforms. Lots of startups use GCP.
Yeah, we are working with a lot of Microsoft stacks, really, aren't we?
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, a lot of startups use GCP. A lot of kind of AI machine learning stuff kind of early on started using Google. And actually I think Google was one of the leaders in machine learning services on their platform. So they have like TensorFlow, for example, which is a big machine learning service they have. And they obviously have Google BigQuery, which has its uses various.
That sounds very like, sort of a glowing review.
Politically careful.
It does stuff.
Yeah. It's more that I'll admit I don't know as much about platforms like Google.
Yeah.
But I'm aware of their main use cases, and like they're all, for the most part, most of these platforms are the same.
I love the name BigQuery.
Yeah, the main differences are going to be the services they provide. They all have a blob store, for example. They all have, like, AWS has S3. You've got storage on Azure as well with their storage accounts, and things like that. And they have, you know, so there's variations of all these different services. So there's kind of a core provision for certain services, and then there are things that each one kind of does differently and may have differently over the other services. I mean, I know AWS documentation historically most people find quite good. I personally don't like it. I think Azure's documentation, in terms of like hands-on as a developer, I find Azure better, but that's just me.
Yeah,
it depends on what I'm trying to do.
No, yeah, exactly. It always depends on what I'm trying to do. It's not my area of expertise because I don't do too much dabbling in that area. But you know, I hear what I hear, I read what I read in the news, and it's like you said, it seems such a prevalent thing for what AWS. I don't know what its market share is, but considering how prevalent it is, it's just insane that so much runs on one provider.
Yeah, I think excuse me, I think AWS is still the market leader. But it depends on what context you're looking at it in. It's the market leader for, like, overall. But I think for certain things, Azure comes ahead. So like identity management, Azure leads in. But you're not just going to be using Azure for identity management. It's just one of the things you will be using it for.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. So you mentioned that like Google was the most machine learning, and obviously there's a more, I guess, enterprise friendly in a way. Azure and AWS has its finger in all the pies, but is very good at
Azure is more focused for enterprise use just because of the Microsoft label, and the fact it makes sense, especially if you're migrating from on-prem Microsoft. It makes sense just to go to cloud Microsoft. It's an easier transition.
Is that part of your main decision making if you are starting your journey onto the cloud?
It depends. If you don't have any kind of on-prem capability already, you kind of have a bit more freedom. You can go to any cloud provider really, but if you're on Microsoft already, it probably makes sense. It's more cost effective overall to just migrate straight to Azure. But they're going to be different things you need to think about, like what services are available. Cost obviously is a huge one.
Yes.
So yeah, it depends. As always.
I think a lot of cost around cloud stuff is not really the cost of the cloud thing itself. It's more the cost of what you're doing with it and how efficiently you've set it up. Because as far as I've read into things, your cost is more impacted by how efficient you are doing something rather than the service provider you are using.
Yes and no. So there are, so I mean, like a bit like SQL platforms. There are certain workloads on Databricks and Snowflake where one is faster and more cost effective than the other, depending on what you're doing, and also depending on what your code is. So, for example, anti-joins on Databricks are there as a big performance boost, and that's how you should generally do joins. They aren't available really on Snowflake, and you don't really need them because it's a different platform. And then both have different AI offerings and so on and so forth. So yes, it depends how you optimize, but you also need to optimize differently for each platform, and it might be easier depending on what you're doing to optimize for that platform. And then the compute that the thing you're developing and optimizing for might be cheaper overall with a certain approach. It really depends what you're doing. I know Google BigQuery, I think initially when it first arrived, was the main the main driver for big data, and that's why they called it BigQuery.
It's a great name. It's a good name.
But obviously, things like Snowflake, Databricks has come along, and generally speaking, are better in some areas. And it's difficult. I keep on saying, "Oh, some areas are better, some areas are." There's so many things to mention. It's very difficult to be specific because they each have their advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
But cost will always be a major factor, regardless of platform, tool, context.
Yeah. I suppose that is your main. I suppose it's probably your secondary buying factor to a lot of things, other than like, does this have what I want it? How much does it cost? And then you start to work out your compromises.
So cost, capability, and time to market. And time to market can include how much is it going to cost you and how long is it going to take to train your staff.
Yeah.
Do they already have a Microsoft background? Yes, then therefore it's probably a no-brainer to go to Azure. Are they all completely green and brand new to all of this? Well, that means you have less of a restriction, or it might be less of a restriction, which is good, but it's going to be harder to make a decision because you have more choice.
Right? Got a choice and a learning curve,
and more of and then you've got to choose it based on, okay, well, we've got to learn one of these. Which one is going to be easier for our engineers?
Yeah. Do you think that's why we've seen a big sort of, like you say, anecdotally, an increase in Azure?
Yeah. Because most people who need to go to the cloud or start having a cloud, most organizations need a cloud capability will most likely be coming from Microsoft.
Yeah.
And people prefer doing what they're used to.
So are you saying then that Azure isn't like necessarily better, it's just convenient?
Yeah. Essentially.
Yeah.
But what I will say, it is better in some regards. So again, personal preference, I really like the templating for, if you're not using third-party infrastructure as code tools like Terraform or Pulumi, for example, to name two, the built-in offerings for templating on Azure is...
is that a data factory or is that something else?
No, data factory is like loading.
Oh, okay.
Right. But no, so built-in on Azure is you've got Bicep.
Oh, okay.
Or what's the other? There is an older form of it, but it's
an archaic form.
It's a templating language that's very similar to HCL, which is what Terraform uses.
Oh, okay.
And it's just a markup for defining resources in Azure.
Right. Just the way you described it is old. It's like a runic. It's on the wall.
I'll have to look it up. But I've used it, which is why it's really annoying me that I can't remember. But anyway, but then you've got AWS where you've got CloudFormation templates, or they have another variation of it as well. So they each have their own flavors of infrastructure as code. I personally think Azure is much better, and Azure has much better tools for reverse engineering as well. I'm kind of going into a bit of an infrastructure as code tangent here, but
that's all right.
Azure has much better tools for taking an existing stack of resources and things that you've built and reverse engineering a template from those things.
So to overly simplify, it's easier to migrate things into Azure, perhaps.
Potentially, yeah. And it might be easier for developers as well to kind of standardize more quickly if they're not used to things like Terraform, because Terraform in itself is a big learning curve, especially if you've never done any templating or infrastructure as code stuff before.
Pulumi as well?
Pulumi is one of those tooling frameworks and implementations where you can choose your own language.
Huh?
So you can say, I want to do Pulumi in Python, and you can essentially define infrastructure in Python code.
I was going to say French.
Excellent. Je ne sais quoi.
Je ne sais pas.
So you get an advantage of bringing your own language. If your engineers are JavaScript, then they can build infrastructure with JavaScript scripts or Java or Python. But as with anything, there is so much capability with it. It can be a big learning curve again. So I personally really like Pulumi. It's a great tool.
Do you do JavaScript then? Do you do it all in JavaScript?
No, of course not. I use Python. Why would you do it in JavaScript? Blind.
How much do you hate yourself today?
Not as much as I did yesterday. Yeah. So yes, we kind of made this about infrastructure as code, but my point is, if you're wanting to standardize, if you're wanting cohesion, consistency across the business, and you're already using Microsoft stuff, then Azure Cloud makes more sense.
Yeah.
If you're doing something brand new and you've never done infrastructure in the cloud before, then AWS might be better, or GCP, because they tend to be, it's an easier learning curve.
Yeah. If you've got nothing existing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked at the AWS exam though?
Oh, I have genuinely seen bits of this.
I started trying to do the exam about 5 years ago and just gave up, because every single time I felt like I'd finished it, they brought out a new service.
I think my problem with AWS is, because I've used AWS, I have used Azure, but I have used AWS. And this is coming from a real beginner's perspective, I find that menu overwhelming, man. I find this...
It's a lot better than it used to be. They've really improved it over the last few years.
Oh, okay.
Lots.
I suppose I did only really look at it like a couple of years ago or something like that. But still, just a couple of years ago, I'm just like, God, which drop down am I going for? And even then, it was just like, because obviously, 2 years ago, AI was not as good as it was now. So it wasn't even like a way to just...
A little AI help bot or whatever, yeah.
Help. Where do I find... What is AIM and why do I need it? What do I specifically need this for?
Yeah, I mean, AWS has a lot of they've kind of code named a lot of their services. Yeah. So you had you used to have like AWS code pipeline and code commit. Code commit was their Git implementation. Yeah. Code commit kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But then you got things like Event Bridge, again, kind of makes sense. You got S3, which on the surface, if you've never heard of it before, how are you supposed to know that's storage? There might be a reason it's called S3.
Storage.
Maybe cubes, storage cubes.
Yeah.
I don't know, but there's probably a reason.
Actually, it would make sense if it's like a cube. They do cubes in that. So, yeah.
Yeah, but then you've got their identity manager called Cognito for some reason.
I suppose Cognito is better than Incognito.
Yeah. So that just the term. I mean, obviously you can Google all these things.
Yeah.
But it can be quite overwhelming to the first time user. Whereas Azure seems to be a lot more face value, logical.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my point is, on Azure, you can generally work things out on face value, which I find makes it easier as an entry level person to it. If you're just starting out, and the first thing most developers do is go in and try things out and don't read documentation for a little bit whilst they're playing around with it.
Just poking things, see what happens.
Yeah, and we all do it. Don't say you don't.
Yeah, I can't read.
Because you want to get hands on and you want to have some fun.
Yeah, exactly. It's way more interesting to know.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't quite work something out the first time, then you start doing some research, and by the research I mean Googling, and that's fine. But yeah, that's another topic for another day. Is how do we learn as engineers?
Yeah, how do we learn?
It's another topic. But yeah, so, and then GCP, like I say, I don't have as much expertise on, but I do know a few people who in larger teams that do use it.
I've genuinely never, I obviously know what it is, but I barely ever heard anyone using it.
It has very specific things. So I know a lot of like greenfield startup AI machine learning projects, usually in the scientific research area, use GCP.
Yeah.
And also, but it's because Google do a lot of funding for academia.
Oh.
So generally they get funded. Obviously, if their costs are going to be lower because Google's funding it.
I mean,
great.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, precisely. And obviously you have the power of all the integrations with Google. So like Google satellite data and mapping is really strong on GCP because it's
Google.
It's Google.
Doesn't surprise
and obviously you can integrate with Azure and AWS. It's just not as easy as a few extra steps. So
they're not going to make it as easy.
Yeah, there's an API, you can get API keys, you can do all that jazz, but it's not as straightforward as on just being native on GCP.
So in which case then it's more niche, but if you fit that niche, you are going to go.
Yeah. So GCP, to kind of summarize then, GCP is very much more specialized for kind of mapping data science, machine learning, specific machine learning use cases. Mm-hmm. Azure is more the kind of de facto standard because there's going to be a lot of organizations coming over from Microsoft, and it feels they're comfortable with Microsoft, so they go to Azure. And AWS tends to be it's the market leader, I'll use that one.
Yeah.
It's kind of got the best of both worlds, but doesn't really particularly excel at anything.
It does all of them more to more than enough of a standard that you'll be able to use.
Exactly, it's got a bit more of a learning curve for some of it, but the cost of ownership can be higher for AWS, but it's also more generic and can be more robust in certain situations.
If you need something that can do everything, then yeah.
So basically, sorry to come to the conclusion of your choice of cloud provider is it depends.
It depends. It's a classic end solution of it depends. It's up to you, but it seems like there is some general conclusions of if you're in an enterprise who's on Microsoft, Azure's great. If you're
it'll do the job more than it needs to,
and that's why it's been picked up so much, because of the later sort of the big pushes from Microsoft and all that recently, all their purchases around AI and all that side of things. Exactly. That's why it's probably growing. Data science, Google, everything else, AWS.
Yeah, and what I would say actually specifically on the AI Microsoft point, obviously a lot of companies use Microsoft Teams.
Oh yes,
and things like SharePoint for file and document storage. Yeah. And if you want to start improving business processes, automating parts of your business, if your business lives on Microsoft, your data's already there.
That's true.
So it makes sense to do more stuff with Azure. Yes,
the no-brainer option.
Yeah, exactly.
Any reason to own more than one?
To do more than one?
Yeah,
it's a good question. If you have a very specific and deliberate need, there's a service that it just does not work well on Azure, or there's a particular integration you need to do. So I believe dbt Cloud, for example, works fine with AWS, but let's say it didn't for a second. It might only support Azure private link for accessing data and things like that. Then you might have to use AWS depending on the rest of your tool stack. So if there's very specific restrictions where you have to use AWS. There's also, for example, region availability. So I think AWS and Azure mostly now the regions are pretty similar. So you can build something in Singapore and have it hosted in Singapore if you want to, for example. But yeah, that could also be a factor, as location of your data. If you're worried about security, privacy, if there's any particular laws or company policy you need to abide by. You might have some of your services in AWS and then some of your services in Azure because of that. So
they don't not talk to each other.
They don't not talk to each other. It's just extra steps. It's just a bit of a headache. Yeah. So yeah, try not to diversify too much, unless disaster recovery.
Ooh.
So if for example, all those companies where the AWS outage occurred had some backup stuff on Azure, then they wouldn't have been impacted because it could fall over to Azure.
Oh, that's very true.
Right?
But then I suppose then you've got the same stuff in two places. So
you got the same stuff in two places, but you could have a process to sync the two. It might be, especially if you're using infrastructure as code, like something like Pulumi, you could build the infrastructure once and just say, build this in Azure, build this in AWS. And then you've got disaster recovery options.
I mean, that's really true. Doesn't that also double your costs as well?
It can do, yeah. So it might be you only run stuff. You only kind of press the button on it and on Azure when you need it to be there. If you're running on AWS, you have options.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, I think we've comprehensively covered everything at a high level.
Yeah. If you have any questions on any of that, I could talk for hours about this stuff.
You could. I couldn't.
And yeah, I appreciate some of that is probably a bit vague, but
that's the nature of it.
It's a big topic.
Yes.
So you don't want to listen to an hour long podcast, and I don't want to listen to myself for an hour. So
yeah, but I think if you definitely wants to dive into anything more specific, just let us know, because that we've circled around the void that is this cloud sort of area.
The black hole, the largest black rabbit hole you've ever seen of cloud infrastructure. I mean, we do another one of these on Databricks Snowflake.
Yeah, you got Databricks and Azure Databricks.
Oh, don't. One of the things to mention there, there are other providers available. So Azure, GCP, so Azure platform, Google Cloud Platform, or AWS, so Amazon web services. There are other options, right? Those aren't not the so there's like Alibaba Cloud. It's one of the big ones. That's kind of up and coming and doing new things. I don't know much about it. I'm aware it exists.
Yeah.
And they're kind of more closely aligned with how AWS do things. So yeah, there are other options, but those are just the big three that we've mentioned today.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll call it there. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see you next time.
Have a good one.
Bye.